Hello class, Dr. Mike here with a few bits of Linux for you. So we're going to look at the actual bootloaders themselves. Now I mentioned before in a previous video that there is GRUB Legacy, I'll call GRUB 1.0 and GRUB 2.0. We will look at GRUB 1.0 here real quick and what it's all about. So before we do that, before we talk about any GRUB, we need to understand how GRUB sees our devices and hard drives. Quick review here, of course. Um, Drives are assigned numbers and letters. What we have is dev directory here, which is our directory, and then we have SDA. So SD and HD in this case, you probably see SD more often. HD is an IDE hard drive. SD is a SATA attached hard drive. So SATA bus is more common these days, but you might not all systems see this designation. So SD and HD define what it is. The A here defines that's the first physical drive. So I actually have a drive here, A. So it's a physical, let's draw a physical hard drive here. Look at those drawing skills. So this is a type of SD, and it is A. And if we look at the hard disk and it's partitioned, we have partition number 1. Now we haven't talked about partitions yet. However, hard drives on Linux are partitioned, and usually this is the boot. 1 is typically assigned to, and not all the time, it can be different, but usually assigned to, and we'll see the boot directory. Now, this is the way we see it. This is the way you'll see it listed in a bootloader. It doesn't care what it is, if it's ID or SATA, doesn't care. It sees it as a hard drive. And it starts from 0, where normally we were starting from 1. So A being 0 and 1 being 0. So it gets 0, 0. If it's SDB, again, if I had a second hard drive installed, and my third partition on that one was being used, then of course we get a 1, and so starting from 0, 2 is 3. So 0, 1, 2. We get that, and we get the 3's here. So to understand how it sees stuff is important. Normally you might not need to edit these unless it's a really emergency boot system, boot situation where you boot into the actual bootloader and try to fix it. I've had to do that once, and it's all the years of doing Linux. So, but just understand what it means. Now, GRUB Legacy, GRUB 1.0. This is GRUB Legacy. What we can tell is GRUB Legacy, again, that boot directory, right? Very important. There is a GRUB directory and a grub.conf file. So in that file itself, we'll see there are separate things we can set. We have a default, basically a timeout in seconds, a fallback, and here's this timeout value here itself. You actually do in the lab. Number of seconds to wait before automatically attempting to boot the default OS. So GRUB can handle more than one OS. You could have several versions of your kernel that can be booted. And in fact, normally if you actually upgrade your kernel, most of the time GRUB, at least 1.0, will actually still default to the old kernel. And then you can go in and actually boot to the new one, test it out, and then switch it later. Splash image is just an image. Hidden menu though, this is something you can turn on or off. This is going to hide a lot of the bootable information. You can add a password for security. It's good for to help deter physical access. If someone gets physical access to your system, they can actually reboot into run level 1, and then actually and run level 1 you'll dump right into a root terminal. With root access, you can add a user account, a backdoor per se. This is the syntax and the kernel and the nature information. This is a lot of information like the path to the root FS, root file system. Tons of stuff here gets passed into the kernel. information about the display, for example, things like that. So most of the time you don't need to mess with this, but you can pass a run level in the bootloader itself. Then we have a chain loader. Chain loader, this is used if you have Windows. So most time, if you have a dual boot system, Windows and Linux, you'll see a GRUB setting for chain loader. So let's take a look at the bootloader here. So here I am on CentOS server. Hope it's not locked up here. It's not, okay. So to do anything with the bootloader itself, we need to be a root user. So you can see here, ID, I am root user. All right. So CD to boot. We can see there is the GRUB subdirectory. Here's our kernel and our boot information, our bootloader and kernel itself. But we want to go into GRUB. So again, I'm in boot GRUB. Let's go ahead and clear the screen off here. So there's a splash image, there's a menu.lst. This could actually be edited too, but we're going to focus on one file here. This is the grub.com file. So if I look at ls-l grub.conf, you can see, of course, it is a read-write for only root. It makes sense again. We don't want any user to be able to edit this file. So I'm a vi grub.conf. And in here, I can change these settings. Again, so here this is the root hard drive. We can see where it is. It's hard drive 00. So this is that from that slide, how the GRUB sees the actual hard drive layout of your system. And we can see all these stanzas here. This is one long line. This is the kernel loading, what's loading. In this case, where the root file system is at. In this case, we use a logical volume management. That's the LV root. We'll go into logical volumes later. LUX is an encryption standard, what language you boot in, the LVM swap system or swapsat. There's a crash kernel setting here, 120 megabytes. Again, more logical volume stuff. Our PC keyboard type, what kind of keyboard is, US, and quiet. So a lot of information here, and our nitrid itself. So what you might probably end up doing is, this is the title. This is the first, or in this case, 0. We always start at 0. This is the first, in this case, default OS. If there was more than one OS, we would see another section just like this below it, and it probably have a separate title. It could say chain loader for Windows. It could say CentOS, maybe version 2.8 of the kernel. So this could be edited. This is a text string. I would not recommend editing anything in here directly yet. If you do mess one of these up, you could cause it not to boot. But the ones you would change the most is the default or the timeout. So to change timeout, I just change word this, make it 30. Here we go. Just do escape go times, and we'll exit VI. And we'll see I have changed it. Date time. I'm going to issue a reboot command, and we will see as we reboot and there we go. Now I have 30 seconds. Now I hit the spacebar to pause it because I did want to show you how this can be used. This is where the physical password could come in handy. I can actually do A to append to modify the kernel argument itself. So I do A append, and then this is the very last line of that long line. I do all that there. I won't go through all of it. We saw that a second ago in the config file. But I could pass in a 1. I can go and take that, enter and accept my change, and give it a second here, and it should dump me into a root. There we go. I'm at single user mode on level 1. So that is the GRUB 1.0. Let's go ahead and do a init 5. Go back to a GUI based. You can see there's all the services starting up, which we're going to cover in a separate video, and we're back to the login. So that is a GRUB Legacy or GRUB 1.0 configuration.